Hey everyone, welcome to a very special Digital Foundry videocast, which is kind of created in somewhat bizarre circumstances. So here's the thing, we've already posted a trailer analysis of Cyberpunk 2077, the hottest game at this year's E3. But here's the thing, doesn't actually show any gameplay. However, it was shown behind closed doors at the event, and our man who was on the show floor, John Linneman, was there. He saw it and it's amazing. So John, tell us more.
Yeah, so we had the chance to sit in on the demo. A lot of people have been talking about it. So just to set the stage here, this private demo was kind of set in like, it was in the upstairs sort of business area of E3, but they actually went so far as to recreate sort of a bar scene from the game in the style of the game. So when you actually go into the appointment, you're sort of waiting in this area with all the stylings and the feelings just to kind of get you in the mood. And then they sort of ushered us into this room that was filled with, I mean, it could have been 77-inch, it could have been larger, but it was an absolutely massive television screen with the game running. They had it on a PC there. We know now what the PC was. One of the gentlemen working on the game sat down in front of me with his controller, and they started the demo and they sort of brought us into the world of Cyberpunk, and it was a great setting for checking it out. So basically, what do you want to know, Rich? Because there's a lot to talk about here.
Right, okay then. Well, to begin with, we need to stress that CD Projekt Red has released no materials of this particular gameplay demo, and that's kind of why we're having to do this video cast. We've got a ton of information we want to tell you, but we have no supporting video to support it right now, which is kind of difficult. But at the same time, this game is so huge, so significant, we need to cover it and we need to tell you what was at E3. So John, I think, you know, from my perspective, a basic question. What do you actually do? Because it wasn't clear in the trailer, right?
Yeah, the trailer was not clear at all. And just to begin with, I'm a fan of what CD Projekt Red does, but I was more of like the Witcher 2 kind of guy. Witcher 3, I'm not as large of a fan of as maybe everybody else. It's still a great game. So I went into this demo not really with the highest of expectations. I was curious, but I walked out completely blown away. It was the coolest thing I saw at the show. So to break it down, what we're looking at here, in my opinion, is kind of an open world take on Deus Ex. And the original Deus Ex is one of my favorite PC games of all time. I'm a big fan of what Eidos Montreal has done with their Deus Ex games. And this is that. It's a first-person sort of RPG slash shooter slash exploration game. And it has a lot of the staples that you would expect in a Deus Ex game. So by that I mean, when you're engaged in a mission, you have a lot of options. And I can kind of walk through parts of the demo. So like, we start out the demo in an actual mission, and you're sort of infiltrating this place. You're meant to sort of rescue a woman who's going to get picked up at the end of the mission, but it involves like a shootout. So you're going in here, they show like a soft cover system. You've got nice first-person gun animations, you know, firing around cover. So it actually feels a little bit more, I kind of compared it to something like Crysis or maybe a Starbreeze game, and sort of how active the hand animation was, which was kind of interesting. Something you don't feel at all from the released trailer. So it's really focused on, you know, basic shooting, lots of powers, I guess it's sort of like augmentations. And, you know, there does appear to be some sort of a stealth system in there as well. And yeah, so you tackle that mission. So from there, this is when it really starts to get interesting. They complete that mission, I'm thinking, okay, this looks good. It's tight quarters. A lot of people have been asking about third person. I just don't think it would work in this game, just because a lot of the indoor areas, they're very tight quarters. It's meant to be claustrophobic with a lot of detail. The game's really focused on first person animation, which again, something that you'd see a lot in Starbreeze stuff. We saw it in some of the recent Far Cry games. Crysis was all about this. Mirror's Edge. You know what I'm talking about when I say that. So that's kind of the goal. A little bit of body awareness, perhaps.
Okay, so we got that description of the very first mission, but tell me, John, I guess this kind of relates to what happens next, but in what way is this a next-gen game? Because you've been pretty clear, well, in your initial tweet about it, that initially at least, you thought that this just wouldn't be possible on current gen, right?
Yeah, so I mean, they've since confirmed that they're targeting current gen machines, so I'll be very curious to see how this goes. But the point where I really was impressed was, so after this mission, you wake up in your apartment, which is great. This is sort of a Deus Ex throwback. You sort of have a place, a space for you, an apartment, lots of stuff to fiddle with, things to read, look at, lots of cool stuff there. So you exit this area. There's no loading screens. You hit this massive elevator. You're going down this huge scale, and you start to get this idea that, okay, this is a big world. And then you step outside. And this is where they sort of pull the late title card thing, which I'm a big fan of. And it's the sense of scale and the sheer amount of stuff on the screen that really leads me to believe that this is sort of pushing in some new directions, right? We've seen a lot of open world games this generation. It's very common these days, but this is the first time it actually, to me, felt like a real proper, just like this massive city with a sense of scale and density that I've not really seen before in a game like this. I mean, it looked like there was just hundreds of people on screen, but not in the Assassin's Creed Unity way, which that also had a lot of people on screen, but it always felt a little bit off, where this really felt like a lot of individual AI-driven characters just in the scene in a very natural way. And there's the height of the buildings and just the level of detail on display. It's the kind of thing you might have seen in something like Deus Ex Mankind Divided or Beyond, which is just really, really detailed, but at a huge sense of scale. And this is a fully open environment to explore.
So there is something that sounds like that in the trailer. Is that kind of representative?
You kind of get an idea from the trailer, but I feel like the actual demo did a much better job at really showcasing just how massive and impressively detailed the city actually is. So this is what separates Cyberpunk from Deus Ex, I think, is Deus Ex was typically based on a hub system. So between missions you explore sort of a pseudo, like miniaturized open world environment. And I like this actually. It's neat because there's a lot of detail in there to explore. But Cyberpunk seems to retain that same level of interaction and detail that you expect in Deus Ex, but somehow they've managed to push the scale out to a massive, insane level. And this means, of course, you can drive vehicles, you can ride in vehicles, you can walk anywhere you want, of course, and it doesn't feel like you're looking at set dressing any longer. It's not just a bunch of buildings that are there just for scenery. It really feels like some sort of a real world to explore.
So when you've got an open world, typically this is the point where you can decide what you're going to do next, where you're going to go. How is that represented in Cyberpunk? Is it kind of like, is there a kind of established linear path that you can follow with the established side quest formula, or is there something different there?
See, that's the thing, is the way the demo played out is after you leave your apartment, your partner is waiting outside for you, and you can sort of walk along, and while you're exploring, he's with you, and there's dialogue happening, and then you kind of figure out where you need to go. And then they walk over to this like limousine thing where you climb into, and there's this huge man in there chomping on a cigar with, all the smoke filling the cab. And he's like, okay, I need you for a mission. Let's go for a ride. And they start driving around the city. He hands you this chip, plug it into your head, and it sort of brings up this sort of AR description of your next mission. And from there, after you get that, you have to go meet your partner again in a certain shop. You get augmented from there. There's a lot of dialogue choices and discussion happening, a lot of story stuff there. And then it's off to find your next mission. And this is the part, I guess, where it feels the most open worldish, in that you're assigned like, all right, I need to go from this point to this point. Which again, that's like any game with an open world, or Deus Ex even, where you have to get to a certain point to start a mission. But in this case, you sort of roll up on the scene, and it's sort of a drainage ditch area where your target is, and you go down there, and that's when more dialogue sequences sort of kick off, and you get into a nice confrontation. And it feels more, there does seem to be more elements, and this is maybe where the Witcher 3 experience comes in, because the dialogue stuff, the dialogue choices, the interaction with the different NPCs, that feels more dialogue driven again, which is more like Witcher versus, say, some of the other games. It doesn't have quite the same rigid feel that I've seen in, Far Cry or Assassin's Creed. And so from there, then, that's when you're sort of given, I guess you could describe it as a main mission, which is more of an infiltration mission, where you proceed to the next spot, you get into this headquarters, there's more dialogue. But, when I describe it this way, it does sort of have that similar sort of structure, but it's the way in which it's executed and the detailed way in which it's presented.
Right. Okay. So when you say kind of like, well, when you talk about Crysis, are we talking about the classic Crysis where basically you have a scenario in front of you, but a very open-ended way of how you decide to deal with it?
So it's a mix of things, and I do kind of feel like that might be where they're going. So obviously they were playing the demo, I wasn't there to play it myself, but when they're actually engaged in firefights, you essentially have a lot of tools available to yourself, and the environments and the maps that you're exploring seem fairly large and open in terms of how you can approach it. I'd imagine you could use stealth. In this case, they had a mix of, so, you bring up you have a HUD, you can mark targets like Crysis, you have different weapons with unique functionality, like the ability to ricochet bullets off the walls, and you can actually sort of see the path it can take, which is all done in-world. You can use these wrist blades to sort of jump up and hang from different points on the ceilings and the walls, and like leap down almost Dishonored style, and take out your targets that way. So there's a whole plethora of options there. So I guess the main thing to take away here is that we're looking at what is kind of commonly referred to as an immersive sim. So it has that detail of a Dishonored, a Deus Ex style game, and that's been brought into a much larger world. And I don't think we've really quite seen that specific combination before. So you get the level of detail of those games, but at a much larger scale. And that's why I'm so interested in where it's going from here, because usually open world games, when you actually get into the proper mission, they can be quite polished these days. I mean, you play like Far Cry 5 or any of the other recent Ubisoft games, and they're pretty well done, but they don't quite have that same granularity that you get in a more linear, carefully crafted style game, which is what I feel they're going for here, to create that sort of crafted experience, but still offer a lot of freedom and do it at a large scale.
Right, okay. And is it this kind of larger scale that makes it what is effectively a next-gen game? I mean, here's the thing. CD Projekt Red have confirmed that this game, at the moment, they say, in quotes, is going to be coming to the PS4, the Xbox One, and the PC. And it seems to me that we're dealing with a scale of world here which is going to be kind of beyond the capabilities of the current gen machines. That's my concern there. I guess the one saving grace of the current gen machines is that they are quite RAM heavy. So it's just a question possibly of scaling back the visuals. But then we look at the machine that they were using for the demonstration, and that's kind of curious in its own right. We've got an i7 8700K, but just a GTX 1080 Ti. Now that is the fastest consumer level GPU on the market at the moment. But, assuming this game is coming out 2019, 2020, we can safely assume that that's going to be kind of like, NVIDIA's higher mid-end level of performance there, the sort of equivalent of what would today be the 1070. So I'm curious as to just how next-gen this actually is. I mean, it sounds to me like even though we are at a very early stage, the game is, still fairly optimal for what it's delivering.
Yeah, I was kind of impressed with that. So according to CD Projekt Red, this was not a vertical slice, but sort of a chunk from an in-development build. So, which suggests to me that you could sort of go other places and do more exploration. And I was kind of happy to see, strangely enough, that there were little bugs here and there. It wasn't completely polished yet. Like during one of the dialogue sequences, the camera of your first-person camera sort of warped over a few feet to the left, which made the dialogue look strange for a second. They ran back and got back in position. So you could kind of see that, it's still being worked on, and it's not a completely scripted, super polished demo, which might explain some of the reason why it hasn't been released publicly yet. So what's there looks really great, but there's still bugs to solve.
Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, we just don't know to what extent the game has actually, progressed through development. Clearly, they've got something that's playable where there is, something that stands up to public scrutiny, or at least your scrutiny, which is probably even more intense than the usual E3 goer. And yeah, but at the same time, I'm kind of not expecting this game until 2019, 2020, based on the kind of just the feeling you get. I mean, the fact that this is the first thing we've actually seen running in real time.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I was also surprised at just how many complete feeling features were in there. The menu system, the way you could skip cutscenes, the different prompts that appeared on screen. It all felt very much like a game that you could sit down and play right now, just unfinished. And it's hard. They've been working on this for a while, obviously, and it's starting to feel like they're really getting close to something. It's just a matter, I guess, of finishing the content and continuing to build out what they're trying to do there. So maybe in 2019, maybe 2020, but either way, I think the main point here is that it's about combining the granularity of a tighter, smaller scale game and essentially blowing it up in a big way. And that's what in effect makes it feel somewhat next gen to me, because you don't really see that level of detail and granularity in these larger scale games like there was in this demo.
Okay, John, so here's the thing. Interesting thing I picked up on Reddit here. Now, obviously, we've been running with the Microsoft version of the Cyberpunk 2077 trailer. And yeah, we've got that at full 4K quality. We can confirm that it's running capped at 30 frames per second, and it seems to be real time. And in actual fact, the build that you saw was also capped at 30, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so that GTX 1080 Ti, we don't know how much headroom there was, but performance-wise, how was it?
Well, for the most part, it seemed fairly steady, but I do recall little dips here and there. Nothing major. It's in development build, but yeah, it's a PC game. It was, sitting at 30 frames per second. I presume it was at native 4K. I couldn't actually get that close to the screen, so it was difficult to say with 100% certainty, but it was certainly sharp.
Yeah, going back to the trailer though, the presentation we had was definitely native 4K. It definitely seemed to be real time, and here's the weird thing. There's a YouTube version of the trailer. Again, this is the thing I picked up from Reddit. There's a YouTube version of the Microsoft trailer which actually seems to be running at a different quality level to the Microsoft presentation. So you can see that the LODs are kind of pulled back in a bit. There's not so much detail on the YouTube version. This is the one that CD Projekt Red actually delivered themselves. And then you've got kind of like differences in lighting and whatnot. So obviously, again, as you said, this is like an early build, but already there seems to be some level of scalability built in, and I'm kind of curious as to why there are actually two different versions of what is effectively the same asset out there.
Yeah, I'm wondering that as well, but you're right, it does kind of showcase what we might expect from some of the scalability options. I'd imagine to get this up and running on, say, an Xbox One or a PlayStation 4, it's just going to be a matter of pulling in a lot of the dynamic lighting, reducing some of the on-screen clutter, implementing more aggressive LODs in there, that kind of stuff. Everything you can do to sort of ease the load of the open world. Like in terms of when you're actually in the mission environments, even though they're directly a part of the world, so far at least they are of a smaller scale. I see no issues with making that work on a current generation console. It's really just the fact that you're getting that really high level of detail on such a large scale that seems so challenging here. I mean, you look at some of the other similar types of games on this generation of consoles like Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, and bringing that level of detail and beyond to such a large scale is kind of unheard of. So it's probably going to require some sacrifices to get there. So maybe we'll actually see this as a cross-generation game.
Yeah, I think that's my feeling about it already. But, when that spec was released by CD Projekt Red, I was actually quite heartened by it. We've got these NVIDIA ray tracing demos being carried out with 4 Tesla cars, And then we've got Cyberpunk, which is, you know, I think you're right. I think there is a next-gen quality about it. It might be a cross-gen game, but I think the scalability is going to be there. And it's running on one GTX 1080 Ti. Now, assuming that is native 4K, like the real-time trailer that we've seen, then, you know, that's 1440p on a 1070, 1080p on a 1060. It might be 30 frames per second, but that's eminently playable on today's hardware, tomorrow's gaming technology on today's gaming hardware. So I'm not unduly concerned right now about the kind of PC or the hardware that's going to be required to get the game running. I do think the scalability is there. So yeah, that's kind of curious.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I'm just heartened to see all these improvements made to the Red engine. The Witcher 3 is a beautiful game, but I always felt like some elements of it didn't quite hit. The water never looked great, the foliage was always a little bit blobby. A lot of the animation work never really did it for me, but you look at this and it just looks so different. That first-person animation work is so much more fluid than anything in The Witcher 3. Just a lot of the effects and the texturing and the lighting, it really does feel like they've dramatically overhauled the engine to the point where it's not recognizable to The Witcher 3. And so the interesting point here is you look at what, say, Bethesda Game Studios has done in the past. I mean, they did fantasy-based Skyrim on last gen, and then they upgraded their engine to get to Fallout 4. The two games feel very similar in a lot of ways. There's a lot of commonalities between the two in terms of the look, the feel. You can see the upgrades, but the lineage is clear. Whereas I feel like Cyberpunk really shares, at least on the surface, nothing with The Witcher 3. It looks completely different in every possible way, to the point where, you know, you can't really say, oh, I can see how this came from The Witcher 3. You can't. It doesn't feel like that at all. And I think that's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, CD Projekt Red kind of have that pedigree, because The Witcher 3 doesn't look anything like The Witcher 2, I don't think.
Well, you know, there's some similarities there, but I see what you mean. You're right. They love to evolve their technology, and they love to make huge leaps. I mean, you look at each of their games, and there's always this monumental leap in terms of what they're doing. So it's interesting to me how these Polish studios are really starting to become rising stars. I mean, you look at what CD Projekt Red is doing, you look at what Techland is doing, and then the guys at Flying Wild Hog with their Shadow Warrior engine. I mean, each one is using a bespoke engine designed specifically for their games. And they're all pushing like really high-end tech features, and just the visual quality is outstanding. I mean, it's the same. I saw Dying Light 2 as well. We'll do a video on that soon. That looks phenomenal. These studios based in Poland, they're really coming up and delivering some amazing results. And it's cool to see.
Yeah, and definitely there's also what I really like to see is a plurality in technology that's out there. And if we go back to last gen, basically everything was inspired in some way by Unreal Engine 3. It kind of defined the generation to a certain extent. But this generation has been very, very different. Obviously, we've seen some sort of homogeneous engines, Frostbite and whatnot. But again, you're right, we have had a lot of emerging new technologies. And yeah, the Polish studios are really knocking it out the park.
Yeah, big time. So I think there's a lot of bright stuff on the horizon for this. And so, before the show, I did a video on Halo 2, right? The E3 demonstration of that. And it made me think about those demos that come along every so often. Sometimes they're shared publicly, sometimes not. But to me, this was on the level of something like the Metal Gear Solid 2 reveal, the Halo 2 E3 trailer, the Half-Life 2 reveal. That sort of event where you see something that sort of sparks your imagination. It obviously shares elements with games you're familiar with, but it pushes it in new ways with new visual design and just like a feel to it that genuinely feels new and different and exciting. So yeah, there is a lot of hype behind this, but it's not just because it's behind closed doors. It really is the kind of thing, it's that type of demo. It is that Half-Life 2 E3 2004 style experience, and I really hope that they release some of this footage soon, because I think the public is going to be blown away by what they see here. It's really, really a cool thing.
I can't wait to see more. Now, hopefully there'll be something at Gamescom that CD Projekt Red will be sharing.
I think they said that they will be at Gamescom again, and they will be there with a different demo.
Wow.
So that's definitely something we're going to have to check out. And maybe at that point, we'll actually be able to release some of that footage online.
Yeah, I'll tell you what though, John, I love these mysterious E3 demos that nobody ever sees. And talking about another one which is kind of gone down in E3 history, which to this day nobody has ever seen, Criterion's Black.
That's right, yes. It is that same kind of thing where they kind of usher you into this private theater and showcase the vision for the game.
Good stuff. So any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, this to me is a game, this is the type of game I've been waiting for, in the sense that immersive sim style games are basically my favorite type of game. I mean, the Deus Ex series, the System Shock, Prey of 2017, Thief, Dishonored. To me, this feels like almost like a Polish take on what Arcane Studios has been doing at a much larger scale and higher level of fidelity than we've seen before, and that's extremely exciting. And I'm also excited that the public is so interested in such an immersive looking single player game. That's heartening for me to see this so much excitement centered on this type of experience. And we saw it again with God of War earlier this year. So there's people love their single player games still, and you know, multiplayer's big, but hasn't taken over yet. There's still a lot of buzz to be had from this type of experience.
Yeah, I agree entirely, and I think that's a perfect way to round off this video cast. So thanks so much for that report, John.
Thanks very much for having me.
No problem at all. Okay, right, as always, please do like and subscribe to support the kind of work that Digital Foundry does. And yes, please ring the bell to get instant notifications if you're already subscribed. And more, there's the Digital Foundry Patreon, where you can support directly what we do if you love what we do. But that's all from us right now. Thanks for watching.